Welcome to the Sword and The Trowel, a podcast of Founders Ministries. Founders Ministries exists for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of churches. I'm Jared Longshore.
And I'm Tom Ascol.
And we have the Voddie Baucham.
That's right.
In studio with us. So delighted to have you here with us, brother.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you all the way from Lusaka,
Yes,
Zambia.
Yes.
And Voddie's joining us for the last couple of days and tonight for a special Institute of Public Theology event. And so you preached yesterday morning at Grace Baptist Church, had a wonderful time there. Last night we kind of caught up on what's been going on in your life the last year and the providence of God. That was a wonderful opportunity just to hear you kind of piece things together with a timeline. And I think that's available. Isn't that conversation going to be available on the IOPT Facebook page and also in the Armory? So thanks for that. And tonight you'll be speaking again. We got a pastor's conference today. You'll be talking to a bunch of guys. So, man, welcome to Southwest Florida.
Thank you.
Yes, I guess before we get into it, just a heads up that we do have a conference coming up, Militant and Triumphant, January down here in Southwest Florida. Voddie will be preaching, you'll be preaching, I'll be preaching, Conrad and Bayway will be preaching, James Coates will be preaching, Travis Allen will be preaching, lots of folks going to be here. We'd love for you to come. You can register at founders.org. Yeah,
and Voddie will also be teaching the third course that we are offering in the Institute of Public Theology on cultural apologetics. So that'll be right before the Founders Conference. So you actually can register for that course. The registrations are open for IOPT. And if you want to take that course, you need to get in early on that. And so you can come for the course, stay for the conference. It'll be a wonderful opportunity to really be fed and challenged. We have a neat opportunity going on right now, too. We have a donor who has said he will match all the gifts given to IOPT through the end of the year. So if God has put you in a position where you can contribute, we would love to have that help. We need that help, and we would trust the Lord to guide you in that. You want more information, just contact us. We'll be glad to tell you about it.
Well, Voddie, you've written the book Fault Lines, The Social Justice Movement and Evangelicalism's Looming Catastrophe. We've already spoken on this podcast about your book, and so a lot of people already know about it. And if you have not yet purchased a copy and read through it, then certainly do that, quick, fast, and in a hurry. You're delighted with the way it's been rolled out. God has clearly blessed the book. How are things at this juncture, however many weeks or months we are now downstream from having the book published?
Yeah, I mean, things are better than we could ever have anticipated. And like we talked about last night, we had this plan for the launch of the book, and we had the launch team, and pre-orders were going well. And, I was scheduled to head out on this, this tour to promote the book. And then, of course, my heart fails and end up with a couple of heart surgeries and never got to get out and do that promotion. And yet, so it's been doing well. It really seems to have struck a nerve, and I'm excited about that, both in terms of the positive response that it's received and also the negative response that it's received. I think, you can learn as much about an idea in terms of who's opposed to it as you can in terms of who's in favor of it, as well as those who are silent about it.
Yeah. As a side note, we produced the film By What Standard. I'm thinking you go after this whole critical social justice stuff, and then when we release the film, you collapse, nearly die. And then you write the book Fault Lines. Yeah. And when it's released, you nearly die.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little uncomfortable around it. I'll be honest. Don't mess with that. Don't mess with whatever demon is behind social justice stuff, because that is some serious spiritual warfare manifesting itself.
Interesting.
No joke. I'm not even kidding, man. Y'all were talking last night, and I was like, yeah, this is serious.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's been interesting to see the response. And of course, man, I'm so grateful for the positive responses from all kinds of sectors. People that normally aren't in our circles, and yet they're true evangelical Christians, and they're grateful for this. And so, you were telling us about Chuck Swindoll's wonderful appreciation of the book, and man, thank God for that. And I've heard from people that are in the broader evangelical world, and they're not Reformed, and yet they're wonderful, godly Christians. and they are praising God for the book as well. So there's been a good response. It's a national bestseller, which it became very quickly after its release. And you don't have the exact numbers now, but it's still
it's still doing well.
Yeah, and we carry it here at Founders, and I don't know how many.
And a lot of places are not carrying it, by the way.
Isn't that crazy?
I went in. We were still in Jacksonville. I was in the rehab program and doing well. We're getting close to getting out of there. And I just thought, it'd be great if we could go into a Barnes and Noble and, take the family in there and stand by the book, on the shelf and, take pictures or whatever. And we go into Barnes and Noble and, I'm looking around, I'm looking at the shelves, I'm looking at the bestsellers, I'm looking at books that are behind us on the bestsellers list, and they're all out here and we're not there. And then I go to the, religion section and I look at where it's supposed to be and it's not there. And so I go to the counter and I ask him, hey, do you have, this book, Fault Lines? And they look in the computer and they say, it says we have one. And it was back in the back. They had to go back in the back, to get the book. And I, so I contacted the publisher and I'm like, what's the deal, man? There are books that are behind us on the bestsellers list that are out there on, bestsellers and, so, and that was the case in many places. And there are still a lot of places. There are Christian bookstores that have decided not to carry the book.
Lifeway?
Lifeway doesn't really have their brick and mortar stores anymore, but at the convention, Lifeway didn't have it in their bookstore. So, again, all of that just points to God's providence and the way that this thing has traveled, in spite of the fact that most of the ways that you would promote a book have been closed. So just couldn't be more pleased. And so I'm telling people, go to your bookstore and ask for it and ask them to carry it.
We were reading through Fault Lines as elders here at Grace and just worked through the introduction or first chapter. I think it's the introduction. And you name names like right off the bat. And you draw the fault line and then you name the names. And I remember you say, why is it that these men are on this side of the fault line and these other organizations are on the other side of the fault line? And I thought, wow, like you name the names. And that's so real. Like we're sensing the realness of that in the evangelical world right now. And you can read the book to find the names, or we can mention the names. It's not like a secret now. It's in print. And we talked about it, but it was clarifying again to say, yes, this divide really is there. And it was interesting to me that it came from you. Like you're in Zambia. You've been in Zambia for many years now. Yeah. Now, you're certainly well-known evangelical. You've been here in the States and you're still here. But it was interesting that it came from you. Like I almost feel like y'all don't want to say it. Like nobody wants to say it over there. I'm over in Zambia. Let me give y'all some outside perspective. There it is. Like boom, you actually put the names in print. Why is it, as I'm still trying to process, why is it that we have certain names on this right side and then we have the other on the other side?
I titled the book Fault Lines because as I looked at this, the way I saw it was that there is this fault and there are people on either side of this fault. And we know, fault lines are where earthquakes take place, right? And this fault was shifting, this fault was moving, and the divide was becoming clearer. And I think the divide has become clearer even since the book has come out. And I just didn't think that it would be helpful for me to not be open and honest about what I was talking about or about who I was talking about. I tried to be as charitable as I could and not ascribe motives, but just paint a picture of what anybody who's watching was actually seeing.
Yeah, here it is. The nature of the coming catastrophe. Why are people in groups like the BD Anyabwile Tim Keller, Russell Moore, the Southern Baptist Convention, Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, 9 Marks, and Gospel Coalition, Together for the Gospel, being identified with critical social justice on one side of the fault. And then you list others, MacArthur, Owen Strahan, Doug Wilson, Sproul, on the other side.
And
Tom Ascol.
Tom Ascol.
That's right. I had to pay him to put me in there, but he did it. So,
or to pay me to not put you. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, there it is, man. And you look at those names 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I mean,
and those are all of our friends.
Yeah,
those are all people that we've been doing conferences with, or we used to do conferences with.
Yeah.
A decade ago.
This is crazy. I'll be honest.
It's
crazy. When I read it with the elders, I said, "Wow!" And I would like. It would be helpful, and you might not have this. I'm not assuming you do have an answer to this. Maybe we do. It'd be helpful to know what in the world, when you have a fault line and people end up where they do, why? Mark Dever, Jonathan Lehman, Al Mohler, all the SBC, over here, John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, Doug Wilson, Tom Ascol. Can somebody help me? Like, why did that? What are the doctrinal presuppositions that cause people to shake down on the sides they did?
Later on in the book, I identify what I believe to be the cause of a lot of it, and it's not doctrine. I believe the cause of a lot of it is relationships. In fact, and I try to be clear about the fact that not everybody who's identified on that side of the fault line, on the critical social justice side of the fault line, is there because they hold to the ideology.
Right.
Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of those individuals are opposed to the ideology. They're not opposed to it publicly. They're not opposed to it openly, but they're opposed to the ideology. But they have invested for the last 10, 20 years in people who are open about promoting the ideology. And so I think for a lot of these guys and a lot of these entities, their silence is more a product of their desire to hold on to relationships than it is evidence of them holding to critical social justice ideology.
And I have to believe that a lot of those guys, once they see that this is heresy driving this, right? This is an ethical outworking of a practical outworking of a pagan religion, that they will say, "Hey, I can't go that far. I can't." So it makes me think that either it hasn't dawned on them yet, or they're suspicious, but they haven't fully realized where it's coming from.
It's dawned on them. It's dawned on them.
Well, then they have to.
It's dawned on them, and we don't want to violate any confidence here, but you and I have had conversations about individuals who have said in private that they get this, that they see this, but that they don't want to offend. In many instances, they don't want to offend their black brothers and sisters who see this differently than they do, which is incredibly racist.
Condescending.
It's condescending, right? One of the things that I appreciate about, and I write about this as well, I appreciate the fact that, for example, when I came out as a Calvinist, that brothers in the SBC basically said, Ichabod.
It don't matter if you're black.
It don't matter if you're black. It don't matter if you're black, right? It don't matter if you're black. You're anathema. And being anathematized to me was an act of respect.
Yeah, it treated you honestly.
They treated me like a brother.
Yeah.
And what a lot of these guys are doing right now is they're not treating people like brothers. They're walking around on eggshells, and they refuse to call people out because of this. Well, anyway, I'll let them, say what it is, but that's not treating people like brothers. Yeah. If you actually have disagreements, but you hold back on those disagreements and you don't hold people accountable because of the color of their skin, then you're not treating them like equals.
I would add a layer to this. I still think I think along with that, that's certainly huge, and probably the primary, especially with a number of the people. I'm sure there's individual differences among the people that are on the wrong side of the fault line. But I wonder about a truncated vision of the truth claims of Christ, of a shrinking back to a churchianity rather than a Christianity that says, well, that's a political thing. It's outside my purview. As a pastor, I shouldn't be involved in that. The trivializing of the kingdom of God idea. So, hey, that guy wants to play that. If it's real clear biblical ethic inside the church community, then I'm on it. But that's more, it's a political, it's a sociological thing, it's a philosophical thing that we can agree to disagree. I think that's a problem as well.
Yeah.
Another problem of why people aren't addressing it.
Yeah, it is. And it's becoming more and more obvious. You know, you've got people who over the last decade or so have been very open about the fact that many Christians have become too political. Right? Open about the fact that, you know, they're against this sort of transformational approach to Christianity. And yet, the critical social justice movement is inherently political.
Yeah.
And these same guys haven't said, listen, you guys are too political, right? The critical social justice movement is inherently transformational, right? But these same guys who have spoken out against that are not speaking out against this manifestation of it. And this hypocrisy is becoming more and more apparent.
Yeah.
And at the root of this hypocrisy is the fear of being called racist, or the fear of throwing away investments over the last couple of decades in people. And I think it's sad.
I agree with you. It's one of the most difficult things for me in getting my mind around this. And when I finally did, and talking to a lot of people, you know, people smarter than I am, more experienced than I have, and I've trusted for years, is, you know, you keep asking them if you see that this is dangerous, and some would say they see it, and some would say, well, it's not as dangerous. It's a fad. It's going to pass in 2 years. You know, if I heard that said to me. But whenever you begin to see it, how can you not speak out on it? And here's what I've concluded. I don't know. I put a bag over everybody's head after a while and just started looking at what they're saying, what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they're not saying. And when you pull the bags up, you're just disappointed. I mean, you feel betrayed almost by these guys. But I've concluded that there's a bunch of guys that just don't have the kind of biblical courage that is needed to say what must be said if we're going to be faithful to Christ, to do what must be done if we're going to be faithful to Christ. And they think somehow they can maneuver, manipulate, and kind of keep things together and hold on both to the relationships and to the truth. And it just can't be done. And the truth is being hammered, and the gospel is being clouded over for the sake of, well, you know, we're all brothers, and give time, give space. And in my mind, it's like, we got a house on fire, and this is not the time for negotiation. This is the time for sounding the alarms, grabbing the buckets, and doing what we got to do to fight this thing. And men we've counted on aren't doing it.
And that's the thing with the fault line is, like you say, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to maneuver it. So if you're on the wrong side of the fault line, and as I'm looking at the book, I was wondering which side is the right side and the wrong side, and knows Voddie's name's on the right side. So I'm saying that's the good side of the fault line over there if you're on Voddie Baucham's side. And if you're on the other side, clearly the light gray must be the wrong side. But if you're on the wrong side of this fault line, but you're a good guy, if you're on the wrong side of this fault line, but you're an Orthodox Christian, and for whatever reason, whether you don't have the courage or you don't have the worldview, you're not standing up I'm saying, okay, well, you're going to come over at some point. That's what fault lines do. It's going to separate, and eventually, you know, you're going to be like a John Piper, farewell, Rob Bell. You're going to have to do that right. You're going to have to do that at some point. So I'm thinking, as this plays out, that's the thing. Like, sadly, you're going to lose some people, and they will. They will straight into heresy.
And that's the looming catastrophe part of the title, of the subtitle.
Yeah.
Right? That we are going to lose some people.
Yeah,
and
but then
we've already lost some people.
Yeah, but then we have a trouble of, I think it's like a lapsy controversy thing. Like, what are you going to do with the leaders that then say, hey, we missed this.
Yeah.
For worldview or for courage, we missed this. How do we get guys to come back on the right side when the inevitable comes? At least from our vantage point, it's inevitable. You're not going to be able to actually stay over there.
That's the question, man. And I'm interested in what both you brothers have to say about that. And my own thinking on it is this. I want them back. I mean, we need them. I've looked some of these guys in the eye and said, we need you in this fight. We need you at your best. Please come help us. And they haven't. And evidently they're not going to. But God willing, some point, they're going to see, yeah, okay, we can't stay silent. And when they come back, and praise God, I want them back, but they failed as leaders. You don't have a position of leadership and fail to the destruction of the people who are following you and then say, oops, okay, now I'm going to lead over here. I think you just need to kind of confess your sin, acknowledge your failure, and be faithful in whatever sphere you've got, but don't expect people to keep following you. You've given that up. That's not for you.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I agree with you in that I hope that at some point, the dam breaks. At some point, all of this shakes out the way that we all hope it will, and that eventually some of this becomes a bridge too far. What's after that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But I hear from too many pastors, too many churches. Yesterday, we had people from churches all over, and some that came from long distances to be here to hear you be here for the day, and with tears, weeping. 20-year members, elders in churches saying, this stuff has come in and I'm the only elder that's trying to stand against it. We've had to leave our church after 25 years. My wife has this wonderful ministry to women. And how many more churches have to be destroyed by this? When the watchmen on the wall that we have trusted for years keep saying, it's not that bad, it's a fad. I don't know.
It's a boogeyman.
Yeah, boogeyman. Yeah,
it's a boogeyman.
And I love these guys, but we can't follow them. I can't commend them.
Yeah. I'm wondering if one of the things to do, if you're on the right side of the fault line, is just begin to build and form a new coalition, like a new gospel coalition. I mean, you mentioned you were the gospel coalition, and then you wrote what you wrote, and then you get canceled from that. But trying to actually say, we actually care about law. So when you're watching, we were looking at Jamar Tisby earlier, and as Jamar is working out his ethic hard, he's working out an ethic. The response is not to say, well, we don't want to work out an ethic. You shouldn't be working out an ethic. It's like, no, we want to work out an ethic, but yours isn't biblical. We want to work out the biblical ethic. We do care. We also like Abraham Kuyper. And so here's the vision. Here's a banner being raised for those who are clearly on the right side of this fault line. Here's a banner being raised because people are saying, well, who am I supposed to trust? Well, you certainly are supposed to trust people that are on the right side of this fault line. And then in addition to that, you want to trust people that can kind of see the times to say, yeah, this is why we got here. I think a lot of guys went woke because there was something missing. There was like, I want to actually love my neighbor. And then they somehow bought into a pagan law.
This is what it means.
Yeah, they bought into a pagan law. But hey, shame on those who weren't actually loving neighbor well, who were allowing these ideologies and this cultural, decay to happen. Because there wasn't an answer. So I think we still need that answer. And it's almost like, regardless of what happens with the leaders that are on the wrong side, let the new leaders just build, develop, write statement of affirmations and denials, doctrine, practice, institutions, organizations. Let's just go. And then whoever comes. Yeah. We'll just, that way they have something built for them. And it won't just be when you cross over the fault line to the good side, you're just against all the bad stuff. It's like, well, what are we for? I think we just need to keep running in that direction. I think we are, and need to encourage more and more people to.
And one of the reasons I think that's important is because the other side has very effectively changed the rules of the game. And what I mean by that is this. When you have discussions with people, they're saying, okay, fine. You don't like the critical social justice movement, but what's your answer to racial injustice? We can't allow it to be framed like that because the very concept of racial injustice basically assumes their definitions, because racial injustice means disparities, right? So if you're saying that I have to have an answer for ending disparities, you're saying that the only way that I can play is if I accept the rules as you've laid them down. And what I'm saying is I reject your category.
Amen.
I reject the idea that, discrepancies between groups of people is, sort of
inherently evil.
That is inherently evil.
Yeah.
That's absolutely ridiculous. So I think, to your point of, having statements and being clear and defining terms. Again, it's one of the things that I try to do in the book is define terms so that people don't get caught in these, these Kafka traps that are being set. And because of that, I mean, you're absolutely right. The only way out of this is for us to be clear and define terms and make sure that people understand exactly what we're saying and exactly what we're not saying.
Yeah, there's three things I think that have to be recovered, and we've been trying to do this. One is a biblical metaphysic. We need to get back to the reality that this is God's world. He's created. Genesis 1:1. I mean, that's foundational. Second, we've touched on it here, law and gospel.
Yeah.
God has spoken about his world, the rules of his world, the rules of his house, his church, and for his creatures who bear his image. And the third is the lordship of Christ. That Christ has all authority in heaven and on earth, and that all other authority has been delegated by him for him. If we can recover those three things and start thinking biblically in those three areas, I think the foundation will emerge on which we must build to do exactly what you're describing. Has to be done.
Yeah.
Amen. Somebody pass an offering plate. Let's sing doxology.
Well,
Sing
I mean, but
doxology.
this is why you wrote the book. This is why we started the Institute of Public Theology.
Yeah.
This is why we've been trying to hammer the things we've been hammering the last few years at Founders Ministries. And by God's grace, He's empowering us and strengthening us to keep moving forward. I'm looking forward to the next several years to seeing how God will continue to lead.
And this conversation is important because, we were talking about this earlier. This is not just a race thing. And so the people that are going to be against wokeness, but then even the guys that are against wokeness and characterize it as merely as a race thing, well, you're totally missing the whole point. Yeah. And so we do need this bigger conversation we've just had because we're dealing with it feels like a Geneva moment to me. I mean, it feels like a historic moment. I know everybody always thinks they're in one, but it certainly, I mean, look at what's happening in our culture. Look at the chaos that is going on around us.
Yeah.
And so what's happening in this evangelical fault line is mapping on, everybody knows, it's mapping onto what's happening in our culture. And the answer, I think, is deep. It's like to the law and the prophets. It's much deeper than just some superficial, if we just get our guy into the White House, if we just get our right guy in the SBC. I mean, like the Ed Litton thing. Here's the deal. Should Ed Litton be removed from SBC? Hands down. Piece of cake. There are hundreds of people that are ready to take his place who have the exact same presuppositions he does.
Right, yeah.
And we need to realize that an exchange of bureaucrats does not a reformation make. And we must go deeper if we're actually going to deal with this very fault line that we're facing.
Let's continue this conversation. Let's wrap this one up and have another one.
But before we do that, I just want to go back to a point that you were making, Jared, this idea of the significance of this moment, the magnitude of this moment. I think that's another fault line. One of the things that I'm seeing is that a way to identify where people are on this, at least one way, is the people who say that this is an historic moment, and the other people who say, it's a fad.
It's a fad. Yeah, I agree.
You know,
putting their mask on to go anywhere, to buy anything.
Yeah.
It's
just a fad.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people are doing, and I think a lot of those people who get this and who, for the sake of relationships, have tried to, play both sides against the middle. One of the ways that they're doing that is by downplaying it and saying, no, this is just a fad. And those guys over there who are railing against it, they're overreacting.
That's right.
to
Extremists.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. It's whistling in the dark. I mean, they're hoping that it's not true. Well, this has been a great conversation. Hey, we want to give away an autographed copy of Fault Lines. So if you will follow Founders Ministries and IOPT and Voddie Baucham Ministries on social media and share this episode, then we will enter you in a drawing and we'll select somebody to send an autographed copy of Fault Lines to. Voddie, thanks for being with us, and let's have another
Absolutely,
conversation
brother.
to talk about where to from here.
Part 2.
Yeah, what do we do?